That's perfect. We're ready to go. Okay, Mr. Co-Chair.
Okay, at this time, we want to welcome all of you to our Citizens Forum. This is our first in-person / hybrid meeting that we've had since the pandemic. So, we're happy to see all of you here today. And this is also the first meeting where we have a new board that will be part of the Citizens Forum board for the next 2 years. So we would like to welcome each and every single one of you that is here today. For all the people attending here in person and online, we welcome you to our Citizens Forum. And just for logistics, for the people that are attending here in person, if you guys need to use the restroom, they're outside the door and to the right. If you guys would like also some pastries, some coffee, we have some pastries, coffee back here. And also just in general for everyone that's attending both online and in person, as the presentations are being underway, if we could please not have any interruptions and wait till the end of the presentation to have our questions and answers. At that time, each person will have a certain amount of time in which they can have that interaction between the presenter and whoever's asking the questions. So please wait until the end of the presentation for those questions. And for any person that has a question online, you can post it on the chat, or you can also speak. But Miss Sally Spinner, the IBWC secretary, will be monitoring the chat for any questions that anyone might have this time. So I guess we can start getting our meeting underway. And first and foremost, we would like for each of the board members to introduce themselves, tell us, who you represent and what are your interests at part of this Citizens Forum. We can start with Dr. Goolsby.
I'm John Goolsby. I'm a researcher with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Agricultural Research Service, part of USDA. And I work on a Moore Air Base on the northwest end of the irrigation district. And I've been on the board, I think it's about 12 years. So what I'm here to do is to contribute as the federal liaison, and also with invasive species along the river, like Lendodonax and cattle fever ticks. So anyway, great to be here again. Thank you, Frank and Commissioner Hiner. Appreciate it.
I'm Eddie Salmona, a businessman out of McAllen. I work for a guy who's been in the water for years. He's actually chairman of one of the water districts. And so I've been involved in water in these areas just in that respect. It's good to see what's going on. And as a board member, instead of just an observer, and I'm concerned about what's going on with the river to make sure that to see that our reservoirs get filled back up, because what I've seen lately, they've been getting dangerously low, and I want to see what we're doing to help that improve.
And you're a new board member.
New board member.
I'm Sue Darling, a new board member, and I'm new PTRGB as relationship development, but I'm also chair of Region M Water Planning Group. I've been on the place since 21 years now, and also executive director of Rio Grande Region Water Authority. And we haven't had a board meeting in 3 years. That's a long story. That's doing the governor when you're playing a member. But anyways, I'm responsible for collecting the Rio Drain money for IBWC. And I met with the county the other day, and their checks in the mail. And Dow County's their check will be in the mail, so we've got the money for you. I've been in the meetings.
Good afternoon, I'm Robert Sines. I'm an associate engineer, done quite a bit of engineering in Dallas for the last 22 years with the firm I'm with. I was very excited to learn more about the IBWC and see how I can help move the IBWC moving forward.
Good afternoon. My name is Michael Kent, General Manager for Down Irrigation District. I am a new board member. I hope to, it's an honor and privilege to be appointed to this board. And I hope to contribute to providing, information and helping water right holders on the Rio Grande in terms of being able to get access to water, and continue to contribute to the existing infrastructure.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Melissa Gonzalez Rosas. I am with the Lower Rio Grande Valley Development Council. This is my second term as a board member for the Citizens Forum. And I've been involved with water, stormwater, wastewater, clean water for the last 13 years. Even is for government. I'm now with the Council of Government, and so I'm trying to share my knowledge, everything on love to learn. And as a regional council of government, I'm excited to see regionally what we can do to help Commissioner Jimenez with all the issues that we have with our water, because it's hurting everybody. And as somebody, I heard somebody over here say, people don't realize that the Rio Grande Valley exists. It's now time that they find out that we do. So that's what we're doing.
Thank y'all for accepting me to the board. I'm Troy Allen, General Manager of Gulf Lake Resilience Solutions. And here are what my colleagues say here. I'm here to advocate for the water, for Mexico abiding by the treaty. Also, I would like to see our river run cleaner. Our river has some high issues with water quality, which I'm hoping that we can see improvements there, and clean up all the invasive species that are in there.
Hello, everyone. My name is Anthony Stambaugh, General Manager with Hidalgo County Irrigation District number 2 in San Juan, Texas, and diddle to what Troy said. No, I look forward to, and I appreciate the appointment on the board, being able to bring an interesting perspective coming from the regulatory side, working in the TCEQ, now part of an irrigation district that obviously is irrigation for agriculture, while being at a district that also delivers a lot of raw water to municipalities. So I really look forward to kind of bridging all 3 or more pillars to help IWC continue to educate the public and for the public to learn where the water comes from, because most folks take it for granted. So
I'm a board member, so I don't think it's my.
So as we continue on, and just to kind of reiterate, as for anyone that is has a question, there will be a time for question and answers, and as the presenters are here presenting, please hold on or hold on to your questions till they're done with their presentation. And when you speak, please speak a little bit loud. That way our microphones and the people that are online can also listen to your questions and concerns. Okay. So at this time, we're getting ready to have our first presentation. And our first presentation is Ms. Isela Canava. She's a principal engineer for the operations and maintenance department of the USIBWC.
Good afternoon. Nice to be here again. I was telling somebody that I've been here more than I think I've been at home, but the past couple of times. I've been here probably 3 times within the past month. But it's good. It's great to be here. I am the principal engineer of operations. Under operations, I oversee our security division, our water accounting division, and our operation and maintenance division, which is all the field offices, including the Mercedes office. So what I'm going to do is give you a brief overview of some of our operation and maintenance activities along the Rio Grande, starting from Amistad downstream to this area. There's a lot more than we do as an agency. Our engineering department does more capital projects, modeling, but this is just an overview of some of our O&M activities. Next slide. And I'll start with our international dams. Amistad, next slide. Amistad Dam was constructed in 1969. It's completed in 1969. It took several years to construct. It is, you all probably have heard this, there's a fact sheet out there on it. It is the 12th largest dam in the U.S. in terms of conservation capacity. We manage this dam. We co-own it with Mexico. It's a 6-mile long dam. It's huge dam. It impounded 75 miles of water, and it covers 65,000 acres. Its purpose is, of course, reservoir storage, flood control, power generation. It serves for drinking water, agriculture, and recreation. One of the biggest issues we have at Amistad, and that is that there's been a formation of sinkholes. There's karstic limestone under the dam that's one of the reasons we're having these sinkholes. So what we're doing, we've been working with Mexico for several years now, and we're at the tail end now of having a solution for that and proceeding with a design and construction project for the solution of this. It'll be a multi-year project. And our engineering department's handling this, but we're moving forward with that solution, and the solution is going to be a composite cutoff wall. Along with the Mexican section and us, we also have Conagua for Mexico and the Corps of Engineers involved in this project. Next slide. So for our routine Amistad Dam maintenance, annually, we have to keep up with the maintenance of the dam. Traditionally, what's done is the Mexican section handles the work on their side of the dam. They have 8 gates and we have 8 gates on our side, and we handle the maintenance on our side. So you can just see some of the pictures of the work that we do. We do inspection and maintenance of our power plant instrumentation, building inspection and maintenance, galleries and weir inspections, a catwalk inspection and maintenance. We actually just finished the in-house catwalk project that's something that our in-house crews are really proud of. So, and then along the reservoir, we have buoys that delineate the international boundary, and we have to maintain and inspect those. We actually need to rehab and reinstall a lot of those. So we've been working up contracts for that, and we had to go pick some up. You can see one of the pictures there. We had to go pick some up from the Mexican side of the border. So this is just some of the work we do. Next slide. Falcon Dam. This dam was completed in 1954 and serves the same purpose, reservoir storage, flood control. We also have a power plant there. It's used for drinking water, agriculture, and recreation. One of the main concerns we have with Falcon is the spillway, and you can see a picture right there of the spillway. And this was during 2010 when we were in flood ops there at Falcon. One of the concerns from our safety of dams inspections is the status and the structural stability of our spillway. So we started work jointly with Mexico. This dam is also co-owned with Mexico on doing studies and studying the spillway and making sure there's no major issues. There was a geophysical study completed in 2020. Good news was there was no major buoys. We are continuing work on that, and with Mexico, we're going to work on a geotechnical study. The Mexican section is actually going to contract it out, and we're involved, of course, in cost sharing that work, and we'll be doing part of the review. Next slide, and this is some of our routine Falcon Dam maintenance. Work is done annually. We have monthly dam instrumentation readings. We also do vegetation control on our dam. We have seepage and weir maintenance, and we have maintenance along the dam press road and the spillway gate maintenance. This year, we're looking to do maintenance on our spillway gate. And this will probably take about 2 months to do at least one gate. They're massive gates. Next slide. San Judas Dam, located here locally. It was completed in 1960. The purpose of this dam is flood control, diversion, and water supply. One of the biggest problems that we're having there is operation of the control panel and the components. We're also having difficulty finding some of these replacement parts in the market. And another issue that we have is annually we do maintenance of our gates, but because of the size of our dam press, we actually have issues finding a crane and a crane operator able to get on there to do some of the maintenance, put our spout blocks that we need. So what we do, the way we solve this is we work jointly with Mexico. This is another dam that's co-owned. Half is in the US, half is in the Mexico. We work jointly to solve these issues. Mexico is actually the one that found a crane operator this year. And go to the next slide. And why that is important is because we have to do annual gate maintenance on our gates. And we do this jointly with Mexico. There's either a cost share or kind of work share agreement. For this year, the US provided materials, equipment, and Mexico contracted out the labor to do to do this work. We usually do 2 gates. This year, we're doing 4 gates. So, and this is just some of the pictures of the work. We of course start with a stop log installation. We do painting of the gates. We have to, of course, sandblast them before we paint them. We're gonna replace the wooden seals, and then we're currently working on the gate wing wall repair. There was a lot of corrosion there, so there's some work ongoing for that right now. Next slide. Retamag Dam. This dam was built in 1973. Main purpose is for flood control and diversion. The problem we have at Retamag is the center gate. When it lifts, when it moves, there's oscillation there, and it causes a major concern of the stability and safety of the structure. Mexico, this is also owned with Mexico. Mexico has already put out a solicitation for replacement of the lifting mechanism for that center gate. We're also going to move forward on replacing the control panel for Retamag Dam. But this work, like I said, this contract was solicited, and we're just working with Mexico on the schedule for that. Once this work is done, we'll move forward with work on Anzalduas to also work on the control panel and some of the electrical work on that. But we wanted to focus on Retamag Dam first. Next. I wanted to just give you an overview of what we do for our safety of dams. Since 1977, the 2 sections of the commission agreed to do joint inspections of our co-owned dams. These are done every 5 years. For participation on the US side, it's the US section, and we contract out with the Corps as experts. They bring a whole slew of experts, each with different expertise. You have structural, you have gate, you have, it's just, they have a whole slew of experts that they bring to this. On the Mexican side, you have the Mexican section and Conagua that participates in these inspections. In 2022 and 2023, we completed the inspections for the diversion dams for Anzalduas and Retamag. So we have the reports for those. We are currently doing, in preparation for the binational inspection for Amistad and Falcon that will be done at the beginning of 2024. We are doing some detailed inspections with the Corps. The US section is. It's actually ongoing right now at Falcon this week, and next week they'll be at Amistad. We also did some supplemental inspections. With the Bureau of Reclamation, they did some underwater inspections for us of Falcon and Amistad. And what this serves is for any capital improvements, this is the basis of the work that we need to do. Once we get the reports, we develop our plan, our safety of dams plan. And that's how we know how much funding we need and what kind of capital improvements we need. Some of the work that we already have ongoing, like at Amistad, Retamag, a lot of these findings came from these inspections. So they're really critical for us. Next. Just wanted to give you a brief overview of the Lower Rio Grande Flood Control Project and the flood offs that we do at both our dams and in this area. And these are some of our aerial pictures that were taken during 2010, the Hurricane Alex. So some of these are pretty impressive. So just wanted to share those with you. Next slide. As most of you some of you may be aware, our Lower Rio Grande Flood Control Project, which starts at Edinburgh or Benitez Pump Station, all the way down to the mouth of the Gulf, is designed to handle 250,000 CFS. Anzalduas Dam is designed to divert 105,000 CFS into the US floodway. And then Retamag Dam diverts 105,000 CFS into the Mexican floodway. And then on the US floodway, of course, we do a split between the North floodway and the Royal Colorado. And then we during flood ops, allow 20,000 CFS to go down the main stem of the Rio Grande. So that's our capacity of the flood control system in the lower Rio Grande. Next slide. Overall, what we do for flood ops in the Rio Grande, annually we prepare for flood ops. We usually by May, we have a binational flood workshop with the Mexican section. We have to have it binationally because we co-own the dams. So anything that we do during flood ops in terms of releases from Amistad, Falcon, Anzalduas is done in coordination with the Mexican section. We have procedures and policies in place and flood curves on how we should do releases during flood operations. But we have an annual workshop. Each of our field offices, including the Lower Rio Grande field office, does an annual exercise with their people. They go on site and they do a flood exercise. But these are some of our stakeholders when we are in flood ops. National Weather Service, we actually contract out with them. And we're in constant communication with them. And they also will serve as our mouthpiece during the flood operations. We are going to be busy. We are very limited in staff. We are very small. We will be busy managing the flood and they will serve as our mouthpiece during that time. You can see some of our other stakeholders, which of course includes the state of Texas. We will be part of and have been part of state and local emergency operations centers. We coordinate work with the irrigation districts. We have agreements in place with a lot of stakeholders to include the irrigation districts. And some of the agreements give direction on when like gates along the Rio Grande should be closed. One of the things we want to avoid is the flooding from the Rio Grande going into the interior. So that's our main purpose. Our main purpose is flood ops along the Rio Grande. Next. And this is some of our annual maintenance. This is what we do every year in order to prepare for flood operations. We mow about 12,000 acres of levee and floodway. We desilt the pilot channel. We do levee grading and resurfacing. We actually have an agreement with the Border Patrol since they use our levees where they provide the material and we provide the manpower to resurface that. Right now, with all the activity we're having on the levees, there is some discussion about maybe increasing the amount that we can do a year because we're getting a lot of wear and tear on the levees right now. And we do floodgate maintenance. You all may have seen some of these gates on some of the roadways. Biggest one is Jackson Road. What happened, these were installed during the 2010, 2012 area. The roadways were not at they actually crossed the flood system. They were not at the water surface elevation that they needed to be. So these floodgates were installed and they actually during a flood should lift. Well, they do lift because we're doing maintenance and we're testing them. They will lift. Traffic will have to stop, of course, and they will allow the flood to pass by. Next, water accounting. Next slide. So as with our operation and maintenance of our dams, we also, as the commission, have established the methodology for accounting the waters of the Rio Grande jointly with the Mexican section. All the work we do is in accordance with the 1944 International Water Treaty. And we keep records in order over the water ownership at the Amistad, Falcon, and Anzalduas international dams. We put out preliminary accounting of the Rio Grande. We put out final monthly accounting and daily accounting at Anzalduas. We have staff in El Paso that oversee this, but we also have a lot of hydrotechs at each of our field offices that go out and do pre-measurements and do maintenance on some of our gauging stations. Next, I wanted to share this. Many of you already know what kind of information we put out there, but this information is available to the public. And And this is the site, and I'll put it up on my last slide too, so you can just go to our IBWC.gov and it can take you in there, you'll see water data. But it's a dashboard and it provides real-time information of the status of the reservoirs. There's a graph on the current status of the 5-year cycle deliveries. There's a wealth of information there that you can get in there. But I just wanted to share this so those that you were not aware of can know where to go. Next slide. The current conditions of the Rio Grande Basin. And I had to cheat a little because I can't see those numbers. But as of December 5th, I'll just give you some highlights. Let me look at my slide. The Luis Leon is currently at 85.5%. Amistad is at about 27%. Falcon is at 17%, and Marty Gomez is, I think it says 57%. So this is just current status of some of the dams, and it gives you status for the entire Rio Grande Basin. Currently, total U.S. storage in our international reservoirs is 722,000 acre feet. Next slide. And this is the current status of the 5-year cycle deliveries. As many of you are aware, we have not gotten much deliveries this past cycle. We just entered year 4, and we're currently about 34.7 of the expected minimum delivery. Mexico, on average, should be delivering 350,000 acre feet. So that hasn't been done, and there's a serious concern if they're going to be able to meet the 5-year cycle or how this is going to be done. And we'll have more discussions on that, I'm sure. And I know we'll touch on some of the measures that we're doing in order to be able to give them the tools to be able to meet the 5-year cycles. Next slide. Next slide. And I just wanted to highlight, because some of these initiatives do fall under the O&M group. Some of the existing work groups that we have of how we're advancing through science. Our water accounting division is leading along with the Mexican section, TCEQ, Conagua, the Rio Grande Hydrology Work Group, and this was established by Minute 325. What they're doing is they're looking at historical information and developing a model that'll give us information to run scenarios to see how to better manage the basin. If there's possibilities or different scenarios that'll give us more water or more flexibility on how to manage the basin. Another group is the Lower Rio Grande Water Quality Initiative, and this group has been around for several years. But what they're doing is that they're studying the sources of salinity from the Rio Grande, from Falcon Dam to the Gulf. And they expect to have this project completed in February of 2025. But that's all I have. I just wanted to give you like I said, an overview of some of our activities. There's more that we do capital project construction. Many of you are aware of our levee gaps that we're working on in the irrigation districts. I know we reached out to you. There's a hydraulic modeling, but this is just some of the work that we do annually and some of our major projects on our infrastructure that impacts this region. Thank you. Yes, sir.
So you have a question about the Amistad fix up there. You described it as a composite cutoff wall.
Yes.
What does that mean?
I don't have details of engineering, but what it is we're looking to put, it's kind of a cutoff wall made out of concrete material, but material that we're going to be going in there. And it would be a process where we're first going to do a grout, kind of put in grout, and see how it travels, because we don't have all the information. Yeah, to fill the void. So as you're putting in the grout, you're going to actually be gathering information. So the extent of the grout, you won't know The extent of the gravity won't be known until you actually start doing it and get all the data that you need what you're doing. So it'll be grout and then I put on the fall of what's being proposed, but all that is still being coordinated with Mexico.
And so Dr. Goolsby, we have for those of you that are really interested in Amistad Dam, Amistad Dam is a very important dam for this region. And it's literally eroding under the dam, right? Like this year, we got 3 new sinkholes. And so right now, there's no funding for this project, right? We do have $30 million in reserves to help with this project. We don't, right now, we're estimating that it could cost between 80 and 276 million. So why the gap so big? Well, we have, like I said, we have a fact sheet out there, you can pick it up. And what it does is that there's gonna be a series of construction projects. One is they're gonna be doing this grout curtain, which is literally drilling and getting core samples out, backfilling with some sort of slurry, filling it as much as they can, but getting information as far as how deep the bedrock is, right? And so that's, I believe, every 9 feet, it's gonna go in one diagonal direction on one side of the dam and another diagonal direction on the other side of the dam. And then we'll be able to understand what type of, it's literally a wall that's gonna go in there, how deep it needs to go. It doesn't need to go the same depth along the whole, it's 1,000 meters that needs to be done, right? And it needs to be done right, because if you don't get that depth correct, you're gonna get water actually putting more pressure on just that one spot, right? And so right now this is all on the Mexican side of it's a 6-mile dam, so it's very, very long. And this is all, the construction has to be done on the Mexican side. There is a cost share between the two countries, like we pay 56%. They pay the remainder because of how we own the conservation capacity. But right now, what we're working on right now is we'll be doing a minute this coming 2024 that will exactly describe how we move forward right now. Ray Macias, who's the principal engineer for us, is working with their principal engineer to issue a joint report. We'll be more than happy to share that as we advance. The first step right now is for them to hire a consultant to do the design of the project. And that's where we're at right now. Mexico has about $20 million ready for this project as well, which is really useful because we're always like behind because they don't have the funds, but they've been giving the funds year after year for the last few years. So they have a little bit of a pot of money to start this. Once we get a better idea of the cost, we'll definitely to share with you. We have to potentially advocate for funding. I only get 2 minutes to get my hair finished.
No, we can
Okay.
keep going.
Okay.
There's more questions.
Okay. Okay.
I guess we'll open for one more question. If somebody has some questions.
Yeah.
Does the lower level in the reservoir, does that help on this repair project or?
Right now, yes, that is correct. Right now, the lower levels will allow for there to be less damage. Less damage as we're doing the grout curtain, right? The other thing is that we're doing the 5-year inspection right now as well, and that's going to give us a lot more information. So we're definitely taking advantage of that.
Mexico, you keep saying release the water, but if they release the water, then.
If there's a flood, there could be an issue. Yes, that's right. We don't know if the inspection is going to tell us that there's serious problems with this dam and that we need to reduce the conservation capacity at this point. Yes, it's a little, this keeps me up at night. This really keeps me up at night.
Right, it's currently at a safety level 2. But the low levels have actually helped us with some of our great inspections, like the underwater inspections. So
Right. And the other thing, there's a lot of infrastructure issues in this dam. We have another issue with the outlet. It was designed for 3 outlets on the US side and at the very, at the very bottom. And one of them was never built. The other one is structurally unsound and the third one's frozen in place. So if something were to happen, we would need to use Mexico's side of the dam to release that water. And so we've got a project in place that's going to go out this next year to get that corrected.
right, it's actually, I think they've solicited, it's gate and stop gate 5. I don't know if it already goes, but there's some work to rehab that gate. We try to do some work and get them to look at the hydraulic lines and all that, and still didn't get it going. So we're looking for somebody to kind of come in, kind of do like the design build and give us a solution to get it operating.
I just have one more quick question. You know, on the, at Ansel Lewis Dam on the Mexican side of the floodway, last year, there was a concern about the brush growing up on the floodway side over there. Has that been addressed or? Like we mow the brush on our side and everything, right, consistently, but brush growing up in the floodway was a concern.
I have not heard that concern, but,
We can follow.
we can follow it.
I will tell you that if we are reduced, if our funding is reduced, Mexico's even further reduced, right? So obviously, we're very interested in them pursuing these types of actions, and obviously that we bring this up at the binational meetings that we have. So we'll find out what kind of the status is and a priority with regards to that.
And Frank and Juan have monthly meetings at least with their counterpart, so that the question that comes brought up and they don't get an answer.
Right, because if they don't have their floodway cleared, right, it's gonna affect our floodway, yeah, I get it, yeah. This one more.
Thank you.
Yeah, two-part question, right? So you said you do the inspections every 5 years. Given the amount of concerns and safety concerns for that, would you consider discussing the 5 years and reducing it to every 3 years?
We would, yeah, we can consider that. We have conversations with the court on this. And we actually have an agreement with them where we can contract them out for services whenever we want. But everything we do is in, based on their expertise and their recommendations. But we can have that conversation.
So just to add a little bit to that, so in theory, the dams are supposed to be every 2 years, right? So we're always kind of cycling through, but they haven't been done. So we're doing them all in 1 year, right? And so basically all 5 of them, all of them are being done in that 5-year process. And so, but your point is well taken, some of them may require a little longer, some of them may a little less, right? And so that would be something that maybe we do need to ask the board to give us that recommendation.
Right.
So. And then,
And my second part so I'm an electrical engineer and I work for a tech company building data centers globally. And I work specifically in the supply chain division. So when I heard you mention 2 of the dams require control panel replacements from the electrical distribution, I'm curious, is that just component swaps or are you talking about complete design of new panels coming in? Because where I work at, we're seeing 3 to 5 year lead time for new panels. And so I'm just concerned with these projects are considered small for these companies and that, you could be put in the back burner from the, the queue of getting your stuff developed.
Right, so the Mexican section already solicited and I thought they were successful in getting somebody for Retamont Dam, correct?
Yes.
Did they talk about any concerns?
Right now, they're in the design phase
Right.
for the project, and that's probably the first, also for Ansel Lewis Dam, that's what they're looking into, doing a design prior to actually going in the building and replacing the control panel and all the electrical wiring from the gates to the control panel.
but your point is well taken
Right.
because that will
Yes.
ask that question.
Yeah.
Just as a suggestion,
Yeah.
probably if you have a short list of preferred suppliers, partner with them so that they can start telling you this design would get you the equipment faster versus this other design.
Okay, thank you, appreciate that.
Okay, we want to thank Mr. Lakanov for a presentation this afternoon, and we're going to continue on, and the next presenter is Mr. Delbert Hubbardson. And the commissioner always kind of, reiterates and really mentions, the science behind, the science that we need in our agency, and Delbert would kind of be explaining a little bit of this science that the agency is undertaking to model some of the the dams and our floodways and the river and the deliveries. Okay, so this time I'll leave this place over to Mr. Delbert Hubbardson. He's hydrologist for the Water County Division for the USIBWC.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thank you for that introduction, Frank. I turned my camera on for just a second. I don't know if you guys can see me, just so I can wave and say hello.
Yes.
All right. It looks like, Frank, you'll be sharing the presentation for me, so I'll just tell you next slide.
Yes, sir.
Great. Thank you. So, you can go back to the previous slide. Thank you. So the first thing I want to say is while I am the person speaking to the group today, I really represent the efforts of a pretty large team. And that team involves people from all those agencies you see on that slide right now. So that's both the United States and Mexican sections of IBWC. We also have technical members from Conagua, Department of Interior, and TCEQ. And everything I'm presenting is truly a team effort by this whole group. So I just like to make that clear. It's pretty awesome what we're doing together and how far we've come. So I'm going to talk about using Riverware, which is a software for simulating river operations, to explore binational basin management scenarios. Next slide. So I think most people in the room are familiar with IBWC, who we are and what our mission is, but just to make sure we're all on the same page, our primary mission is, of course, to apply the boundary and water treaties between the United States and Mexico. And in the event that there's a difference in interpreting them or applying them, our agency has to settle those differences and figure out how to move forward from there. Next slide. So I'm going to focus on the 1944 Water Treaty. Sorry, was that a question? I picked up some audio.
No, you can continue.
Okay. I'm going to focus on the 1944 Water Treaty, in particular Article 4, which spans the Rio Grande from Fort Quitman to the Gulf of Mexico. So on the screen right now, you see a map of the Rio Grande watershed, and the watershed's depicted in that pink polygon. And somewhere on there, someone can move the cursor. You can see a dot for Fort Quitman, and that's the start of Article 4 for 1944 Water Treaty, and it covers the Rio Grande all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. Next slide. So here are the key provisions under that article. First and foremost, Mexico delivers water to the United States along this reach of the river. And the United States receives one third of the discharge from 6 tributaries in Mexico that are named in the treaty. And that 1/3 shall not be less, and this is how it's stated in the treaty, shall not be less as an average amount in cycles of 5 consecutive years than 350,000 acre feet annually. And as you just heard P.E. Canava mention, we are currently just got into year 4 of the current cycle. It ends in October 2025. Now, in the event of an extraordinary drought or serious accident, where Mexico is not able to meet that minimum average of 350,000 acre feet annually, then in the next 5-year cycle, not only do they have to meet that minimum for that cycle, they also have to pay back any debt incurred in the cycle that ended with a shortfall, right? So it's an increased burden for them to do that. And another important point is if United States capacity fills in Amistad and Falcon reservoirs, a new 5-year cycle begins and the old one ends. So let's see how this plays out. Can we go to the next slide? So here you just saw a version of this graph from Isela, and I'm just going to walk you through it real quick. On the x-axis, we have cycle year. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. On the y-axis, we have accumulated volume delivered to the United States in acre feet. This is a graph we produce weekly and put on the website. You can see this particular one is a little dated, October 28th, but that's okay for the purpose of this talk. If you need the up-to-date one, you can find it on our website. The red dashed line represents the rate required, the rate of delivery required to meet the minimum 350,000 acre feet a year off the 1/3 share from the 6 named tributaries. Now, in real life, we know there's a monsoon season and then it gets dry in the winter months. And so we don't really see that pattern, but for reference purposes, that's what that dashed line shows. If it were to be delivered to the United States at a constant rate, that's where we would be. Now we have a bunch of different lines, and each of those lines represents a 5-year cycle. And if you're like me, you would have looked at the dates and thought, well, the earliest line starts in 1992. That's about 30 years ago. There should only be 6 5-year cycles, but there's a lot more than 6 lines on there, right? So let me walk you through that. On the left side of the graph, you see some really steep lines that terminate early. They don't run the full 5 years. And if you remember, I mentioned on a previous slide that if United States capacity fills in Amistad and Falcon, a new 5-year cycle begins. And that's what these lines are. They're very steep. So that suggests there was some kind of storm or hurricane or big inflows coming in, filled up US storage. There's a couple little tiny lines, some yellow and gray ones. So US storage was already kind of full and we started another cycle. And there was just enough water coming in to fill up our capacity and make us reset yet again. The more interesting part of this graph to me is all those lines that go the full 5 years. And let's look at the blue and green line there. There's blues and a green. And note, they run the full 5 years and they don't make it to the minimum delivery obligation. So what this tells us in those 5-year cycles, United States share of the 1/3 from the 6 named tributaries did not meet the treaty minimum. And you can imagine if you get a couple of these in a row, it would be really hard for Mexico to pay back the debt from a previous cycle, as well as meet the minimum for the current cycle, right? And so a few decades ago, the commission signed into agreement Minute 234. And what Minute 234 does is after a 5-year cycle ends with the debt, like any of those lines you see there, the United States can receive water from either Mexico's 2/3 share on the 6 named tributaries, or through reservoir transfers in Amistad and Falcon. Now, one thing I want to point out on this graph, on those blue lines and the green line, it doesn't encompass any actions that were taken by the commission to settle the debt. This just shows the flat 1/3, the base 1/3 volume from the 6 named tributaries. So while that 1/3 did not satisfy the treaty minimum, there were actions taken out between the sections of the commission to ensure that treaty compliance was achieved, right? So I just want to make that clear. Now the pink line, which I haven't really talked about, does show some Minute 234 actions in there. So we can see right below it, there's a 2015 line that ends. And the pink line now has to make up that deficit of that 2015 line, as well as meet the current deliveries, right? So the pink line doesn't show what was paid for 2015. It was paid, that debt was settled. In addition to that, if you follow the pink line, if you look in cycle year 4, there's a little vertical jump there. That's a reservoir transfer. And we see at the very end of the 5-year cycle, it looks like the pink line didn't quite meet the red line, but there's a vertical line there. And that was a series of reservoir transfers that were undertaken under Minute 234 to meet that demand. And at the end of that, the United States owned over 90% of the water in Falcon and Amistad. So you can imagine for farmers in Mexico, that puts them in a pretty stressful situation because they don't have much storage left to work with. Meanwhile, for farmers in Texas, as you all are aware, you're dealing with the uncertainty. You don't know what you're going to get from Mexico at any given time. So all this asks the question, what can we do to manage the basin differently? Can we be more proactive about it? Because if y'all recall in 2020, Mexico did open up deliveries from La Boquilla. And there were protests and they were violent and it required military intervention. So, this is serious stuff, as you all are well aware. And we just want to answer that question. What can we do that's more proactive so we're not trying to play catch up in a subsequent 5-year cycle or at the end of a 5-year cycle and create these drastic situations where, for example, at the end of 2020, United States owns most of the water in the reservoirs and creating stress for Mexico. Or we can prevent the uncertainty, right, for Texas farmers not knowing how much water they're going to get and work with in a given year. Next slide. That brings us to Minute 325. Minute 325 was signed in October 2020. Now 325 did a few things, one of which was it ended that 2020 5-year cycle and authorized the reservoir transfers that made sure that we ended it without any debt from Mexico to the United States, that their treaty obligations were met. But Minute 325 also stated, if you go to the next slide, please, now we're going to take measures to improve the predictability and reliability of Rio Grande water deliveries to users in the United States and Mexico. Next slide. So how are we going to do that? Well, that minute established two work groups, and P.E. Canava mentioned this in her presentation. There's a policy work group and a hydrology work group. I work on the hydrology work group, and we consist of technical representatives from all those agencies I listed earlier. And our goal was to exchange data and to work together to develop a binational model that represents operations along the Rio Grande from Fort Quitman to the Gulf. And we can use this model to analyze current operating conditions on the river and alternate operating conditions, alternate management scenarios, alternate policy rules, and see what effect would that have on the water versus how we typically manage it. Now, we don't work in a vacuum. We work under the guidance of the policy work group. And so they tell us what they would like to see. We provide feedback on that. I guess that's a short way to put it. So next slide. So what does the model look like? This is a screenshot of an older version of the model, but I like it because there's a map in the background and you can kind of see what's happening. So if you squint, you can kind of make out the outline of Texas, right? In the upper quadrant there, you have the Big Bend region, and down in the lower right, you can see the Gulf of Mexico. Also, you see the Rio Conchos coming in from Mexico on the left side. It also doesn't show, but it's in the model. We have Rio Alamo and Rio San Juan coming in. And we have all the 6 named tributaries simulated to their headwaters. So it's a big model. And we have Conagua to thank for that. They delivered the initial version that we're currently working with, and it has hundreds of objects. So each of those nodes you see in there connected by lines is an object. It could be a reservoir object. It could be a diverter where water is diverted out of a main stem of a river. It could be returns. It could be a reservoir. So all these things are connected by those lines, and the lines represent flow paths. Water is moving between the objects. I think that's all I need to say about the model, or at least this particular image. Next slide. So here's the history of it. These efforts have been going on for a while. It goes back to 2008, where the Rio Bravo Basin Council in Mexico, along with Conagua in the Mexican section, decided to move forward with developing a model to help analyze water distribution within their portion of the basin, and also help them look at treaty compliance in addition to delivering to their own farmers. Fast forward to 2016, and the University of Chihuahua delivered a working model that was calibrated to historical data. This is the starting point of the current model for all intents and purposes. And in 2017, there was a decision made to improve United States representation in the operations of the model, and that led to the formation of an initial hydrology work group. Now, for one reason or another, these efforts stalled, and there really wasn't much progress made until 2020, when Minute 325 was signed. Minute 325 was the one I mentioned a few slides ago. And this minute has renewed the focus by both countries on leading this collaborative effort to see this thing through to the finish line. And I'm excited to say we're close. We're really close. It's really cool. Next slide. So let's talk about the model. What is it actually doing? Well, we are going to have a baseline scenario. That baseline scenario couples current day allocation processes, current day representative demands, right, with 1950 to 2008 input hydrology. So the old model was historical. That was delivered. It was calibrated. It used historical demands, historical evap, historical flows. Now we're not there anymore. We took that calibrated model and we're using the naturalized inflows from 1950 to 2008, but with current operating conditions. So for example, Amistad Reservoir wasn't around in 1950, right? But in our model, we're going to feed it this 58 years of input hydrology with Amistad active. All the reservoirs are active. We're going to feed it 1950 to 2008 hydrology with current day demands, right? And current day allocation procedures. Now that's our baseline. The next thing we're going to do is develop alternate management scenarios using that same input hydrology. And there are several scenarios already in the model, and we're working on others. And this is going to let us explore, well, let's not do the baseline. Let's try this other approach that maybe is more proactive in addressing deliveries to the United States. What does that do to storage in Amistad and Falcon? What does that do to treaty compliance? What does that do to farmers, United States and Mexico, right? And once we have results from the alternate management scenarios, we're going to compare those results using performance metrics, as well as data visualization. So the performance metrics that have been developed focus on a few things. One is 1944 treaty compliance. So what percentage of the treaty have we complied with, right? And how many times are we at 100%, how many times at 90%, et cetera? How about equity of water distribution? We made those deliveries to the United States, but at what cost to farmers in Mexico? Or alternatively, this policy preserved water from Mexico, but at what cost to farmers in the United States? We want to find a solution that is more equitable rather than less equitable to farmers on both sides. And we look at equity both internationally as well as within each country. So how equal is it to upstream users in Texas versus downstream users, or upstream users in Mexico versus downstream users? So that's kind of a neat metric. We also have a metric focused on delivery volume to water users. So what percentage of a particular diverter's maximum annual authorization are they actually able to divert under the baseline scenario and under alternate scenarios? And we also have a metric in there looking at potential for environmental benefit. So this is focused more on the Big Bend region, and it's just looking at, based on the amount of water moving in a given month through there, what potential is there for fish spawning, for beneficial sediment movement, things along that nature. Next slide. So to summarize, what is this model not good for? It's a monthly time step model. We're looking at big behavior, not micro behavior. It is not good for simulating daily operations. To run these simulations, we're using generalized values for evaporation. We're using generalized values for demand, right? So we're not looking at forecasting or predicting specifics for a given year. We're not going to be able to tell a diverter or an irrigation district, you will have, this many acre feet to divert in March. That's not what this model is for. And because we're combining historical hydrology, but with modern day procedures, it's not a historical model anymore. So we can't really compare it to historical data. Now, the initial calibrated model was that way, but we've taken it to the next step now, and now it's no longer a historical model. So what can we compare it with? Well, we can compare it with the baseline scenario, right? The hypothetical in the model that says, if we took historical hydrology with current day practices, well, here's our output. Now we take historical hydrology with alternate practices. Here's our new output. It's good for comparing that and doing a trend analysis. What are the trends on delivery to farmers? What are the trends on treaty compliance, et cetera? And in general, just for identifying general rules to manage the basin. So that's our goal with this model. Next slide. So where are we? Well, version 1.0 is near completion. I've mentioned several scenarios have been developed. I can't talk about all of them because they're under development right now, and we're sort of keeping that to ourselves. But there's a couple I can talk about, and one is minute 234 specifically. Now, minute 234, I mentioned it earlier. That's the minute that allows the United States to take part of Mexico's 2/3 share or do reservoir transfers. And the minute is great. It tells us where we can get the water, but the minute doesn't tell us how to do it. It doesn't say, well, you should enact it at this point in time, and this is how you'll enact it. So one thing we've done is we have a scenario where we've added structure to minute 234. And we've done it in a way where we can test different structures. So what do I mean by structure? I mean, let's trigger minute 234 when Mexico is 50% behind on their deliveries. Let's also trigger it when they're 60% and 70%, 90%, right? We can trigger a wide range of actions, or we could set a bunch of different thresholds, a wide range of thresholds. And then when it triggers a minute 234 action, we can test a bunch of those. So we could say, well, if it's year one, let's say United States gets 50% instead of 1/3, right? But if they fall too far behind and it's still year one, let's get more aggressive and make it 66% or 2/3. That's one set of thresholds we can test. Or we can be more aggressive about it. And let's just jump straight to 100%, right? These are just things we can explore in the model. And when we run these different runs, we can look at the output for all these different things. And I have an example of some output here. This is just one of many things we're tracking. in this graph here. And what we're looking at here is accumulated deliveries to the United States. And this is a preliminary output early on in model development, but it gives you an idea of what we can look at. And so on the y-axis, the up and down, we have treaty deliveries. And then on the x-axis, we have model year, and there's 58 years there. And each color line is a different model run, where we tried a different combination of thresholds and actions for minute 234. And we can see there's several periods where the lines are identical. A lot of those are not full 5-year cycles. You can see from the base of them, you see the deliveries go up and then they drop down. That's a new cycle. And some of them are kind of narrow. Well, these are times when a 5-year cycle resets early because the reservoir is filled up. Now, minute 234, if you recall, isn't allowed to happen until the 5-year cycle ends in a debt. So you have some wide areas where it's identical because we can't enact minute 234 yet until that 5-year cycle ended in a debt. But then in the following 5-year cycles, you start seeing diversions in the lines, and that's where minute 234 is put into effect. And we can see, oh, run 3, which is very aggressive, really in the second cycle increased deliveries to the United States, maybe, right? And then run 2 and 3, not so much. Now, what you also won't see here is if they're paying back debt for a previous cycle, and that's another thing we track. We can look at how well does the different thresholds pay back debt that's owed to the United States, because we don't count deliveries, minute 234 deliveries to the current cycle until that debt is paid back from a previous cycle. And what I'm not showing here, but another scenario we have is, well, what if we can do minute 234 at any time, not just after a 5-year cycle ends in a debt? Let's be more proactive with this tool. And we could say, oh, we're in our first 5-year cycle, and if Mexico's too far behind, let's enact minute 234 now. Let's see what happens, right? Maybe we can avoid those drastic actions of trying to pay back a debt from a previous cycle while meeting the current cycle's demands. So that is the goal, and I'm showing you an example of data visualization here, but we're actually further along, and we're playing with different things here to really convey the different parameters of interest. So that's where we are. We're really close to 1.0. Next slide. Here is the team that's been working on it. Like I said, I'm just one person. I'm lucky to talk to you, but this is the full team. And I just want to emphasize that everything we're doing couldn't be done without everybody there. Everybody there has pulled their weight and contributed something. It's a really great working relationship we've been building up over the last few years, and I'm happy to be part of that team. And with that, I'll open it up to any questions you may have. It's me.
All right, there you go.
All right, so, I appreciate, first of all, you did a very good job of speaking clear and covering your information very clearly and very understandable. It's nice that you have these models and that you're playing with different scenarios. For us as a grower group, I don't have time to wait for your model to get done. I need to know today what's going to happen for tomorrow. And so the question I have for you is, if you've been wargaming things, at what point through your models and scenarios are you going to say to the growers here in the valley that there's no more water and the rest of the water is only going to go to cities? I'm sure you've already wargamed that out. What percentage of the water has to be in Amistad and Falcon for you to say that to us?
So that's a function of TCEQ's allocation rules, right? And so we're not changing TCEQ's allocation. So whatever rules are in place now is what's going to dictate how much the farmers get allocated. And it comes down to available United States water, right? Minus whatever can't be released due to dead storage, minus whatever operational reserve is needed for the cities, and whatever's left over is what can be allocated to farmers.
If we're at 22% right now, can someone tell me what that number is? We're going to say there's no more water for farming because it all goes towards cities.
Well, it really depends how much that water is already tied up in your accounts, right? But the main number is the operational reserve, which, help me out, TCEQ, if you're on the line. I think it's 75,000 acre feet operational reserve plus whatever municipality reserve is in there.
Correct, the operation reserve is at 75,000.
So it's 112 each month for the cities that are dedicated to that. Community rights, 112 each month, plus operational reserve, 75, and it's maintained, so that's what it does. We kind of talked a little bit, in 1999, they did a study, when it got below 20 and ag was cut off, they did a Brandis study. And said the average city would get 63% of its water, because it couldn't have ag pushing it. And she takes 63, and then the cities average 15 to 20% to put up the canal, so cities would get about 48%.
That was in 95.
99.
99. What's the percent growth population now?
Well, yeah, no, that's another thing. As it's converted to city, you've got half of the allocation. So there's actually more wanted for ag as it gets converted from ag to city. The city's allocation is 1/2 of the ag. And that's gone up from a low, we looked at where it's about 12%, and now it's about almost 21% is municipal water. So there's 10% more, or 5% more water for ag than there used to be, because cities get lower allocation according to TCQ. Mexico doesn't care about that, but that's internal with us. So it's more complicated each time, but that's why when it goes below 20, cities need to start talking to their districts about push water and all, where the hell is that?
So, but it's below 20, the trigger point then in the models?
Yeah, in the Brandis study, yeah.
So your question.
Delbert, this is Tudor Yulehorn. I'm chairman of Rio Grande Valley Sugar Growers down here, an agricultural representative, I guess. And I'm wondering how much, because of the University of Chihuahua has provided all of the data into the model, how much back testing of their data do we do to verify that the data they put in that goes back to 1944 or 1950, whatever it is accurate?
That's a real good question. So a lot of it is in good faith because it was reviewed by Conagua as well as the Rio Bravo Basin Council, as well as their university, right? So the naturalized inflow data sets we're using, because we're really looking at water moving in. Let me split up. We can think of the model having two contributions. So you have the Mexican portion of watershed and the United States portion. And so what we're using for input hydrology on the Mexican portion is Conagua's official naturalized inflow data set. It's their official data set, right? And it's codified in law how they calculate that. And that just is what it is. We can't deviate from that. And it makes sense to use their official standardized data set. Now on the US side, we're not simulating up into the headwaters. We're not trying to simulate the Pecos River Compact, for example. And so we're using historical gauged inflow for the United States side. And that's something that's on my task list to review, but I don't expect too many issues there because when they first developed the model, they were using USIBWC accounting data to derive those inflows. So I don't know if that answered your question, but that's it in a nutshell.
So I guess, Delbert, is verification of the data from Chihuahua, how fundamental is to that if we're using our actual data on the historical gauge inflow as well as the naturalized inflow data set? Is that something that we should be thinking about?
Yes, so without getting too far into it, we have asked for their source data to look at how they verified it. We just haven't gotten it. But that naturalized inflow, to answer your question, is pretty key to driving everything because that water was driving deliveries from Mexico. If we want, we could push it with them, but right now we're operating in good faith that this is their official data set and they calculated it in accordance with the rules that are codified in their law.
And just to add to that, this is the model that they use to model their allocations, right? So they have a vested interest to ensure that it's correct data.
Yes, it's going to be one and the same. So the model they gave us is the model that they're using for their own internal policies. And then their goal is to use the binational model once it's complete. So
My concern is that it's in their best interest to, when they put the data in, to minimize the amount of inflows or the productivity of that watershed so that they don't have to meet that going forward. It limits the amount of water coming out of there historically.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Adrian Cortez, one of the hydrologists who's been working on this issue for, my entire career at the agency, so over a decade. The naturalized flow data sets that you've been talking about, there have been analyses done by academics. to compare it, for instance, with TCQ, calculated naturalized flow. So we have performed back checks before on this data, right? So there's not a, is there going to be differences? Yeah, because there's different ways to calculate the numbers, but for the most part, they're very similar with each other. So there's not anything that would cause us to say they were front loading the data or back loading the data to come up with a certain outcome, right? So we have checks that have been done by entities in the United States to sort of say, yeah, it's a reasonable number that they use for their data set.
Thank you. My name is Dante Galeazzi. I'm with the Texas International Produce Association. Like Jed, represent a lot of the agricultural producers in the state. Delbert, thank you very much for the presentation. 2 questions for you. First off, this new hydrology model that you're talking about and its impact to minute 234, is it or will it start looking at addressing Mexican non-compliance to the treaty? As you pointed out in the graph, you can basically see that there are no transfers of actual water. What you're having is just paper transfers essentially. And second question, wouldn't your model essentially arrive at the same conclusion that Mexico has arrived at in terms of agreement with the treaty, which is that they're just going to wait until a storm comes through to refill water and then continue to do paper transfers?
So it's a little bit to unpack here. Let's
30 years to unpack, but yes, go ahead.
No, I understand. So, the whole point of the hydrology work group, and I understand where you're coming from, because historical behavior, right, establishes a pretty strong pattern. But right now, it seems as if there is an interest by both countries to try and be more proactive about it. As you know, at the end of the 2020 cycle, Mexico had to deal with some pretty severe consequences because they waited a while to deliver. And opening up La Boquilla created a situation that they'd like to avoid. And doing the paper transfers at the end really hurt them. We had like 98% of the water in Amistad, 9% of the Falcon. So farmers in Tamaulipas had a 0 allocation, right, for a couple of years out of Falcon. And I think they have an interest in trying to avoid that scenario as well. And that's the whole purpose of the scenarios where you asked a question about how the model will analyze treaty non-compliance or impact it. Well, we're analyzing different scenarios to look at how well or how much treaty compliance is improved or not improved, right? And the whole point of the modeling group is to explore. So as far as decision making, that's going to be on the policy group as we show the results. But the model will inform decisions on what policies to try to improve that treaty compliance. I don't know if I answered all the questions there. Did I leave something untouched?
Yeah, the one about the storm. Wouldn't your model essentially arrive at the system that we currently have, which is that we are not seeing any actual water transfers from the tributaries in Chihuahua and Coahuila? What we are seeing is a practice where water is basically transferred over as the reservoirs are naturally filled through storm events.
So the whole point of the model is to explore scenarios where we're more proactive about it, not just waiting for a storm to overtop and spill. Certainly that's going to happen in the model, and that'll reset some cycles when it occurs. Yes. And so like the treaty compliance metric, we have 2 versions of it, and one of them is weighted by month. So those short cycles that are because the storm filled up will have less influence on the metric than cycles that run a full 5 years because we weight it by month. So hopefully that helps us get over that bias. But again, the whole purpose is to explore other policies beyond just waiting for the storm. So
just to kind of add to that, so yes, you're right, the model's going to show that's happening because that's based on real-time data, right? So the idea behind this, so we haven't gotten to the point of making this a predictive model where we can actually project out, kind of based on historical storm runoff. That is one of the things I really want to pursue beyond what we're doing right now. This is just meant to be a tool to say, okay, at this policy work group, we want you, let's say we happen to be at year 2. Okay, I know we just finished year 3, or even right now, right? What can we do so that the next 5 years, by the 5th year, Mexico meets its water delivery? So we want you to run the scenario where it's 100% to the United States. We want you to run the scenario where it's 75% to the United States. And will you get to meeting the 5-year cycle? That's what we're looking at based on historical data. That's the tool that we're developing right now. We haven't gotten to the point of actually predicting, and that will be one of the things we're working towards.
So in that statement that you're saying, we keep talking about 5-year cycle. The way that we're reading is the 5-year cycle is only in cases of extreme drought or hydraulic dam failure. Knowing that Mexico's reserves in Chihuahua and Korea were in excess of a million acre feet, sorry. That technically doesn't fit the description of the extreme drought event. And so I'm just kind of wondering how we keep kind of pigeonholing ourselves to this 5-year.
I'd like to, so the 5 years
Yeah.
is the position of the US federal government on paper dating back to 2005. That is before me, okay? Where it's an average of 350,000 acre feet over 5 years. I can't change that, right?
Sorry, I didn't phrase that comment correctly. I guess what I'm saying is I'm a little concerned that we're talking about predictive models based on a 5-year cycle. That concerns me, because if we are already in, you've got the federal government saying one thing, our local water use is saying another, and now we're about to get forward on a model development process that basically complies with only one idea, which is the 5-year cycle. That's concerning. I mean, you heard what Jed is saying. We've got 2,000 less acres. We've got 1,000 less acres of cabbage, 2,000 less acres of onions already going in here in the valley or not going in. We've got water districts ceasing water service to ag users. I mean, I'm very concerned that we're looking at models that continue to promote this 5-year agreement rather than just looking at how do we continue water access, right, on a regular basis.
Right. And so that from a policy perspective is much broader than what this model is. This model is meant to be a tool just for treaty compliance.
Okay.
Right? I think you're right, Dante. I think you're right. We need a more holistic model that entails what you're asking for, but that doesn't exist now. And that's one of the things that we need to, and when I go to DC, this is one of the things I've been talking about a lot, is the lack of science that exists with regards to what you're needing. This region deserves that type of analysis, and we have no one doing it right now. Right. And so right now what I'm doing is I'm looking at different opportunities to partner with universities who can do that for us, because, we've got 2 hydrologists that are doing this, but they're also doing the full-blown water accounting, right? We do not have a science department to do that right now. I've talked to CCEQ about, kind of expanding that. And I think that's where we need to head more medium term from a policy perspective. Okay. Yeah.
I was gonna say, we get focused on the 350,000 acre feet. Really, the 350,000 acre feet is only our third. Mexico's 2/3 is 700,000 acre feet. So the annual requirement under the treaty is really 1,050,000. And is that what's going into the model when we're gonna see, will it produce the 1,050,000? I mean, I think we all know that the watershed is over allocated in general. It really has to rely on a storm event every now and then to keep us going. But it needs to be based on the 1,050,000 to take into account Tamaulipas' share. We don't get our share unless they get their share.
I think I can answer this and then provide some input on the previous question back to the previous question without getting into too much detail because it's still exploratory. We do have scenarios in development looking at the system as a whole, right? So moving water around from basins upstream to downstream under certain conditions. It's not just waiting for a storm. I just want to throw that out there because I think that's part of what you're asking. As far as the 350,000 acre feet just being a third, yes, the model takes that into account. So what it does is it's simulating Mexico's allocation procedures to their farmers. And then they're going to move water around between their reservoirs and move it downstream. And then that water is split. If Minute 234 isn't enacted, for example, that water would be split 1/3 United States, 2/3 Mexico. So it is tracking that full volume that needs to be delivered.
Good afternoon. This is Sally Speener. I'm the United States Section Secretary, and Commissioner Hiner mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, or Frank Fisher mentioned, that I would be moderating the chat. We do have a question from Jay Bragg of the Texas Farm Bureau on the chat. I guess this is a question for you, Delbert. In your presentation, you mentioned equity for farmers in both Mexico and Texas under different scenarios. When do you anticipate that portion of the model being completed? And of course, their concern is that the Texas farmers are running out of water due to the low deliveries in the first half of the 5-year cycle, but Mexico is continuing to irrigate upstream without delivery. So how are you going to be addressing the equity issue in the model?
So thank you for the question. The equity is already in the model. That part is complete. And it's just a real simple, it's an evaluative measure, right? So we have policies that we're going to test, and then we evaluate the equity after the fact. And that evaluation is already in there and able to be done. We just need to finish the rest of 1.0 in the model. So we're doing some final tweaks onto some of the model topology and to some of the release rules. And once we're there, we can start doing the testing. So hopefully next year, we'll start seeing some overall results.
I guess we can continue on with the meeting today, and we thank Delbert for your presentation.
Thank you for the opportunity. And if there's any other questions, I think my email is somewhere on there. If not, there's people there in that room that know my email. Feel free to send them to me.
Or if you want, Delbert, you can post it on the chat.
Oh, yeah.
And we'll leave the place over to Commissioner Kinet, and she'll be presenting the next presentation.
So thank you everyone for the opportunity again. I want to thank all of you for making the time to be here. I know there's a lot going on in the region. As many of you know, I've met with many of you on multiple occasions, and I really appreciate the advocacy that you have for your region, because I'm doing the same. As far as whenever I go to DC, one of the things that I've done is I've met with growers when Sean Bashir first contacted me, right as soon as I started. And I responded, and I came out here to visit, and I got a feeling for one of the situations that was going on. And the more I'm able to understand with regards to the crisis, the more I'm able to share with stakeholders that this is going on. I was talking with some of you a little earlier about some of the coalition buildings that have been going on, like for instance, in San Diego, and how they've been able to really inform decision makers in Congress as to why it's important with what is going on in that region, right? And Dante, I know you must come from the distinguished family from Nogales, Arizona, of produce. No, they're Galeazzi's as well.
Right, yeah, from further down in Mexico.
Yeah, you've heard that, right? I'm sure people have kind of put you together with them, right? But anyways, what I was sharing was that some of those statistics to have in a one page is really useful. And I'll give you an example. In the case of San Diego, only one small community is really affected, Imperial Beach, small, right? And they say we are in 700 days of closed beaches. And that's really impactful, because that people can visualize that, people can understand that, people can, in this case, you guys are what do they call the bread and thread basket of the region, right? And so that's one of the things that I highlight when I meet with stakeholders. So a lot of thought went into what I'm presenting today, because of all of those meetings. This is my 7th stakeholder meeting, okay, in the region. I think I've been here more times than any other commissioner has in the entire tenure, especially with some of those long-lasting ones, right? So let's go to the next slide. What I'm going to talk about is what we're working on with regards to bringing predictability and reliability to deliveries to the region. So, as you know, there's been a lot of talk about Minute 325. Minute is the tool that I have as the USIBWC commissioner to make agreements with Mexico. That is the tool that I have. Mexico is is another sovereign country. And so in 22, my predecessor, Commissioner Harkins, negotiated this minute, which she did one thing that I thought was really impactful. Well, she did other things, but with regards to this, is in this minute, they established a technical and a policy work group to develop tools to improve predictability and reliability. So look at those two words. Technical and policy work groups. How do you think Mexico used to meet to discuss water? That hot, right? And so I'll talk a little bit about how the establishment of these two work groups has now really started to elevate the discussion and bring more attention to the issue in both countries. Let's go to the next one. Okay. So part of the minute 325 was that we were going to have a minute in place that would bring more predictability and reliability of water deliveries to bring benefit to both users in the United States and Mexico, right, in both countries. Let me tell you, Mexico does not like, as much as we hate to think this 5 years, this constant 5 years, since the cycle of 1992 to 1997, up until that point, the treaty worked. And it worked because there was rain and there was plenty, and the reservoirs were being filled and there'd be spillage and that's how they made deliveries to the United States. Mexico made deliveries to Mexico. To the United States. It's just based on overflows from their dams. Until the cycle of 1992 to 1997. And ever since then, 1997 to 2002, 2002, to 2007. The only cycle that those were all ending in debt, except for the third cycle where it was made up. And then in 2007 to 2010, Hurricane Alex hit. So that was a short cycle. But then we go back to 2 more cycles, right? Where it's 2010 to 2015, that ended in debt. And then they made it up in 2015 to 2020, right? So there's this habitual pattern now of every 5 years. And people were fired in Conagua. They were, because of some of these issues. And I was there because I used to run this organization called Water Environment Cooperation. I met many of you while I was the general manager there. And I saw this happening over this time. But what I do know is that way of running, it hasn't worked. I mean, do we think the status quo is working? None of us think that, right? So what we're working towards is to change that. And so we formed it at the end of 2022, which our first meeting was in February of 2023. We formed a Rio Grande Minute team, okay? Because developing a minute is hard work. I mean, what are you going to talk about? What's important? What gets in? What gets out? And so we've had a lot of thought and a lot of very smart people involved in this. So let's go to the next one. So these are the members of both the policy work group and the minute team. Okay, so the U.S. members are myself and my team, the U.S. section of the IBWC, and the state of Texas, specifically TCEQ, and the Secretary of State's office. Secretary of State. Those are the people that have been attending our meetings. On the Mexican side, it's the Mexican section and Conagua. Conagua is the decision maker, so they're right there at the table with us, eyeball to eyeball. And then we have the observers, which is the Department of State. They have been there as well as Mexico's foreign ministry. We also have the hydrology work group, which is doing the scenarios that we're asking them for. Well, they haven't done a lot of scenarios for us because they've been building the base. We did not get this model until December of 2021. So really a bulk of the work has been done in the last 2 years to get into a point where we can start running scenarios so that now when we meet as a policy work group, we ask them, run the scenario, tell us how this is going to advance meeting the requirements of the treaty or other relevant scenarios. Let's go to the next one. Okay. So we talked a little bit about the Rio Grande policy work group. We've had 10 binational meetings since 2021. Okay. And in those 10 meetings, we're bringing up water, we're bringing up, some of the issues that are doing. This policy work group meets 2 to 4 times a year. This is the first time we have a framework to meet on a regular basis. Like I said before, it was ad hoc. And usually it was not in a way that would have a standardized agenda, minutes associated with that, as well as when we have a binational meeting, if we had 10 binational meetings, we had 10 pre-meetings of just the US side, right? Where we're talking what's important to the United States. How does Texas, I say I'm lucky, I tell Texas, I only have one user, that's you. You guys are their user, right? And so that's how we involve all of you in all of this, right? And then with regards to the Rio Grande Minute team, just in this year, we started doing the negotiations. We had 9 meetings. Constantly talking about we started with a whole list of things we want to address. And we start going, by what is the Mexico's position? What is the US position? And how can we come together and say, this is a point of tentative agreement, okay? And then, of course, the Rio Grande Hydrology Work Group, they have been meeting every 1 to 2 months to calibrate this model and get it ready for us to start using. The Environment Work Group is a group that came to us. It's called the Joint Venture Group. And they are a group of state, federal, and NGOs from both sides that work on the Big Bend. So our position is getting that group stood up and having them have the opportunity to bring more water to Big Bend, brings more water down to this area. This is, we're modeling this after some experience we have on the Colorado River, where on the Colorado side, they've actually invested about $50 million in Mexico to leave water up in Lake Mead in water conservation. And so these NGOs have an opportunity to bring resources to the region because they have access to philanthropy, they have access to the farmers, and so they are boots on the ground for us. Let's go to the next one. So when we negotiated this, this minute, I sat down and I reflected upon what were some of the overarching principles that went into it? What was the thought that went into this? This wasn't just, kind of let's, just build upon some ideas here and there. But one of the things that I think we all can agree on is that the status quo is not working. This constant waiting for the 5-year, which we're still functioning somewhat under the status quo because this minute the tools haven't been applied. And so we've had, like I said, we've had a pattern since the 1992 to 97 cycle of this hand wringing every 5 years. And that didn't happen until then. Okay, so we've got to break that cycle, and we've got to have a way to start advancing this. And again, this will be posted on our website. You'll have access to these presentations, right? The other thing that we learned was that the minute, especially for Mexico, is really important to have the legal tools that they need to accomplish what needs to be done. I'll give you an example. In the last minute 325, when they did a reservoir transfer, the state of Tamaulipas sued the Mexican federal government, specifically the Mexican section. And the Mexican section won. Because the Supreme Court in Mexico said the entity that has the authority to do a reservoir transfer is through the minute process of the Mexican section of the USIBWC. Okay, so this minute is really important for them as a legal path forward. Okay, the other thing is that one of the other overarching principles is that there's some elements in here where if water needs to be put to beneficial use and both sides have to agree. Okay, it's not something like where Mexico could say, I'm going to do this and you have to accept it. That's also a caveat here. The other thing I kind of, transparency to dialogue and science. Right now, this is the first time we're starting to put the science out. This is the first time we're starting to understand the consumption patterns of both countries. And then the other thing is, for me, a really fundamental overarching principle was to understand the impact of Texas stakeholders. Like I said, I've been out here at least 7 times meeting with stakeholders, understanding the issues, trying to be able to say, this is what's impacting our stakeholders. I've been in meetings with the state of Chihuahua, and all of the information you've been providing to me, I give to them. And they're starting, it's kind of like, like kind of chipping away, and then we also want to grow the pie. But the last one to me is something that TCEQ has really advocated for and we've supported. That Mexico needs to manage the basin with Texas as a user. And that is one of the things we are constantly harping on, that they cannot manage the basin just saying, whatever rain we get, whenever we get rain within the 5 years and whatever spills is what goes to the United States. That is no longer acceptable. And the policy work group is where we now have a structured approach to start having those discussions with Mexico. And so when I have those discussions with Mexico, I bring it up to Department of State and it starts getting on the agendas of other, more important people than me. So let's go to the next one. Okay. So what are the key elements that are going to be going into this minute that we've taken, you know, all of these meetings, all this thought, all this work that has gone into it. And many of you have heard some of these because you've been at several of the stakeholder meetings that I have. One, it reinforces the existing work group. Maintaining the hydrology work group and the policy work group forces the two organizations to meet and discuss this on a regular basis and allows for Mexico. Remember, Mexico really uses these tools to get resources, right? They have limited resources, and Conagua, you know, they manage all the water in the country. So it gives the Mexican section the ability to say, you have to come to these meetings. You have to provide human capital to be able to do this. You have to be able to participate in the hydrology work group. That's what the policy work group does. And I've seen it on the Colorado River happen over and over and over. They started with minute 316, minute 317, minute 319, and now more recently minute 323, and we're negotiating right now minute 331. That is how we start to advance dialogue and advancement in a lot of the work that's being done in sharing water, right? We also created some new work groups that are in here. We have some operational improvements, and I'll talk a little bit about what those were because we did have some scary situations, or one in particular this summer. And then we're also giving you tools for Mexico to comply with the treaty. Now, this is a temporary minute. It's not like we're going to be signed to the end of time with this. It's a pilot. It's a 5-year pilot. So we get 2 years of this cycle and 3 years of the next cycle, and we have the ability to extend what has worked well and eliminate and just let expire what has not worked well. Okay. And so for us, we are going to be testing some of these concepts in here. Okay, let's go to the next one. Okay. So let's talk about the work groups. I know I've done a lot of emphasis on reinforcing the existing work group, which is the policy work group framework, which is the framework for systematically reviewing updates, actions, and recommendations. Who's at the table? The Mexican section, Conagua, the state of Texas, TCEQ, and the Secretary of State, ourselves. And then we have the observers, Department of State, and the Foreign Ministry in Mexico. The hydrology work group continues. It does the technical analysis on potential scenarios that we asked them to do. And then many of you are aware that we had a work group that wasn't codified called the Lower Rio Grande Water Quality Initiative. I know water quality salinity is a real big issue. Now that it gets in the minute, it really elevates the resources that the Mexican section can bring down from Conagua, because a minute is a binding agreement in Mexican financial programs. It takes precedence. Okay. The other thing is that we're establishing two new groups, the projects work group and the environment group. Now, the projects work group is intended to build a framework to identify projects that could potentially conserve water, bring more water to the region. They could be binational, they could be in Mexico, they can be in the United States, but the idea there is to grow the pot. Now, I know there's been a lot of talk about minute 309, and when I say the minute who shall not be named, because of the $80 billion that was, divided up between the two countries and the lack of permanence that came along with some of those water deliveries. It was really interesting to hear from Chihuahua that technification of their water users did not reduce the amount of field crops. I mean, they were very honest with us. We had a symposium, a Rio Grande symposium, a binational, the first of its kind, a binational Rio Grande symposium a few weeks ago, where we brought Tamaulipas, the state of Chihuahua. We had users there. We had also academics there, and we talked about some of these issues that are going on, right? And Chihuahua said, we don't want to grow as much, but how do we start restraining that? And that's a function of the federal government, is restraining some of that stuff, right? So again, I'm not defending them. I'm just saying, if we don't start following those actions, we will never know if you're able to really bring more water to the region. So that's what the projects work group is supposed to do. Then we have an environment work group, that's a new group that will leverage the existing group of the joint venture group, that they have access to foundations and funding and have studies done in that focus on Big Bend. Again, the idea is to bring more water to the Big Bend area, which will eventually lead to more water into Amistad and Falcor. Okay, let's go to this one. So that's the work group. Operational improvements. So these are a few things that we identified is this summer, we had a situation where both the water demands for Mexico and the United States were higher than what we could actually physically get out of the dams. So we put a provision in there to improve coordination on the demand and releases from Amistad and Falcon dams. Okay, and so the idea is to get some operations coordination on how we do that. There'll be a joint engineers report that that principal engineer here, Isela Canava, will be leading in order to ensure that we have the proper mechanisms in place to avoid this in the future. Okay. The other thing is clarifying when a 5-year cycle begins and ends. And this is specific to, for example, when we have stormwater or when the reservoirs fill and we have to start a new cycle. For us, a new cycle started every day. For Mexico, it started when it filled, and if water is spilling, that's considered part of the delivery. Now, we didn't accept that. We didn't accept that, and it wasn't accounted for like that. But now we're being clear, because what happens is that we've had issues. They have told us that they have issues with the Mexican farmers said, we delivered this much water, and they tell them it's spilled. It doesn't count, right? Now it's in there, and there'll be no more arguments as to whether that spilled water counts that we were not able to put to beneficial use. Okay, because it was spilling out of our reservoirs. One more thing. The other thing is it authorizes a seasonal pool to store more water in dry months. This is something very typical of other Corps of Engineers does it, Bureau of Reclamation does it, where let's say we get a boatload of rain and we want to raise the conservation capacity a little bit so that we can have some water that we can take into the dry weather. So that's another one. So Principal Engineer Canava will be working on some of the joint engineers report that will lead to how we're going to manage all of these operational improvements. Let's go to the next one. Okay, this is what I call the status quo. Advancing the status quo again, from just letting the reservoir spill, and whatever spills is what 1/3 of it belongs to the United States. This is how it was managed and has been managed up until this point. So first of all, Mexico has said, what are we worried? We get into debt after the 5 years. We have another 5 years to make it up. We got to end that. We got to end that. And that's what this does. It says you affirm that the 5-year cycle, as long as there's no accident or extraordinary drought, right? And so we want to make sure that that is clear, and that makes it clear for them when they talk to their users. The other thing is utilize minute 234. Does anybody remember when minute 234 was enacted or signed? Take a guess.
Sonny's not here to tell us.
All right. It's been over 50 years. Yeah, 1969. That means there's been like no major changes on how water delivery's been made since then. I think that's a great disservice to this area, right? And so now we're adding minute 234. It allows for Mexico to have flexibility to deliver out of their water more than the 1/3 share. So if they want to get 100,000 acres down to Texas, they have to deliver 300,000 acres. But last summer when we were looking at getting water down to Texas, they didn't have it. And it was a real issue for them. I mean, then we had the monsoons that filled up, the reservoirs, and that's another story with regards to how they filled up and we only got a certain amount at that point, right? But the whole point is that they want to have the tools so that they can allocate more than the 1/3 share or do a reservoir transfer in the first 5-year cycle. It's not waiting till the second 5-year cycle, which is what is allowed right now. So we don't have to wait 10 years for these types of tools, or more than 5 years, right, for these tools to be applied.
So that would be more like a credit versus a debt. Like if they want to send out more water the first 5 years.
Okay, no, not right, we haven't gotten to that yet, okay, we haven't gotten to that yet, right? So in that sense, so let's say they want to, let's say 400,000 acre feet, went into or 400, let's say 300,000 acre feet, 200,000 goes to Mexico, 100,000 goes to us, but maybe they'll say, we're going to give 150,000 to the United States. And so that applies average 1.75. But we recognize that the 1/3 minimum still applies, right? So it's like, if for some reason we get more water because it's our 1/3, that doesn't hurt us. Okay, so we did a lot of talking on the minimum of the 1/3. That is very much well understood here. Now, how do we incentivize them to deliver their water before year 3 or year 4 or year 5? We put in here a credit, okay? But it's for only if it's from the 6 trips. It's only if it's above the 1/3 share. It's only if the United States agrees, and it's only if can be put to beneficial use. Okay, there are some guardrails on this, and we're looking as part of this to look at putting some systems in place so that all of a sudden they're not 500,000 acre feet with the credit going into it, right? We're definitely, that's not something we're looking for. The other thing is that it's only good for one 5-year cycle. It doesn't go on forever and ever and ever. Eddie, right?
What if we tied the, we are writing minutes to the minutes?
Okay, I will answer that as soon as I finish my presentation. Is that okay? Eddie, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay. It also okay, so I've talked a lot about how we've been getting water. It's basically whatever has spilled over the dams. That's it. That's how we've been getting our water. Now there's a provision in there that looks at reinforcing the need for releases from reservoirs. I was floored to hear that they have never opened their gates to deliver water to the United States. You guys knew it.
Yep.
But there was no acknowledgement. Right. Now we have the model, we have with all the past data, and they have very clearly manifested that's how it's been working. So now there's a provision in there that reinforces the need for opening the reservoirs beyond what has been current practice. Okay. Hold your question there. It's not perfect, but again, this is a pilot and we're advancing. Remember what I said on the Colorado River, it was minute 316, 317, 319, 323. You guys are gonna make this work. This is not gonna end here. Okay, let's go to the next one. Okay, again, exploring possible investment in water conservation that would benefit both countries. That could be in Mexico. I know many of you have talked about the Brownsville Weir, reviving the Brownsville Weir again. One of the things that I've learned just with the modeling is our reservoir only have 2 years of storage. It builds and in 2 years it's down. It builds and in 2 years it's down. So it's really hard to manage a basin if you only have 2 years of storage available to you, right? So again, that gives us the opportunity that if the project work group says, you know what, this is something both countries need to advance, then we start advocating for that. Well, you can lobby, I can't, but I can advocate, right? The other one, and I know this is a sensitive issue, is San Juan and Alamo rivers, right? We want to be able to bring more water to the region. We want it has both sections have to agree. It's got to be put to beneficial use. And again, we have a drying system. We have a drain system. And so how do we ensure that we get all of the water resources that could potentially be delivered? It does not mean it leaves Mexico off the hook on the 6 tributaries. We consider this a last resort. And Commissioner Janeka and I have talked about developing scenario, putting something on paper that would say, these are the conditions which would be acceptable for us. I'll give you an example. I was told by Del or Adrian that in the past, I guess when they, in order to ensure that the region is maintained whole, that they've accepted San Juan water in combination with delivery, right? And so again, these are tools that we're gonna be putting in place to ensure we want to bring water to our growers, we want to bring more water to the region. Okay, continue to work on additional measures to improve predictability in Rio Grande water deliveries, including future minutes. Okay, this is not our last minute. This will potentially generate programs such as, maybe water conservation or projects that could actually, those will be separate minutes. And this is not the last minute that will continue to advance predictability and reliability. Yes, my dream is that we can say, the United States can expect this minimum amount. You put it in your, it's like, a flat payment, your minimum payment in a credit card, right? And then you can make higher payments as you get, flush with cash or something, right? So my dream is to eventually get there. We're not there yet, but to eventually get there. But this is what is taking steps to get more regular deliveries from Mexico. And go to the next one. So why is this important? Why is it important for us to find a minute, right? Well, one, we know that it's the only formal mechanism the IBWC has to encourage compliance with treaty. Yes, it says encourage. Right? And I know Tudor is going to be telling me, and let me tell you, I was just in DC and I met with all of the congressionals along the border, and they tell me the same thing. Yeah, it's another country. What I can do, this is in my circle of influence is a minute. But, continuing to advocate, to pressure, one of the things we're going to be doing is making sure that water deliveries get put on all of the agendas for the next meetings with Mexico. That was kind of within my circle of influence. But what everybody's doing here is a coalition building. That's helpful. That's really helpful. This is the first time we've had so many districts on our citizens forum. You're stuck with us for 2 years, or we're stuck with you for 2 years, right? So you will continue to, advocate for that, right? Okay. The new minute is also required under minute 325. It is, it's a legal obligation to be moved forward by December 2023. It was in minute 325 that we need to do a new minute to bring predictability and reliability. And funny how, does anybody know how we picked December, or how it was picked December 2023? Does anybody think it was deliberate? Both countries have elections next year, right? So it was really important. It was really deliberate. I was a part of that process, but it was really deliberate that date that was selected, right? Again, building, growing the pie, changing the status quo, and expanding science brings transparency to this, the situation that is going on. I think that's my last slide, and I think there is questions. Okay, all right. I know Mr. Galeazzi was like itching to tell me a question. Mr. Dante.
I did. So
okay.
So you had a couple slides back when you were talking about what some of the goals are for the minutes and some of the achievables. Talked a lot about incentivizing, talking about need and encouragement. It's a lot there about the teeth, right? What are the consequences? What are the implications?
Right.
Because that's really the situation we find ourselves in now, right? You have 30 plus years of non-compliance scenarios. You now have a mentality where Mexico is basically waiting on weather events and then conducting paper transfers at the conclusion of a 5-year cycle.
Right.
And so, I mean, it's gotten us into this very challenging mess.
Right.
And I don't see ideas coming up in these minutes, or at least I don't see it proposed, where you're saying, okay, if Mexico doesn't do X, Y, Z, here's the repercussions. Here's where they now have to answer. And that's where I feel like we really need to see that be added in this new minute, right? Because
I differ on that. Let me tell you why. let me just tell you, okay. Well, first of all, so Mexico's another country, right? And so
Right.
when you talk about diplomacy with another country, you have two negotiating points. Incentives or punitive measures. Punitive measures have traditionally been two things. Military action or trade sanctions. Trade sanctions are outside of but it doesn't mean somebody else can't do it.
Well, but what is not outside of your control is adjusting the minutes so that it automatically captures water in Amistad or Falcon, kind of like Delbert was alluding to, right? Where it says, okay, Mexico, if you don't comply, and you're off by X percentage in year one, then you automatically default to allowing the US to capture that 1/3 or the amount different.
And we would love to be there, but we're not there yet. We're not there yet. And so again, to me, Mexico would have walked away right from the negotiating table from the beginning if we had said, you have to do this. You have to have that team. We are not there yet because they have to work with their users as well. And so that's what I'm saying. Right now, this is a pilot. And at the end of 2 years, Mr. Galeazzi can come and say, I told you so. It's not working. Right?
I'd much rather
do that too as well. I'd rather would have had that, but again, you have to negotiate. You have to negotiate. This is as far as we can get.
That's where my question comes into play, because if you tie the two together.
Okay.
The Colorado
Okay,
and the Rio Grande, that's where you can have.
And so let me add something to that.
Yes.
Where does it say in the tree that we can tie the two together?
But why
Exactly.
can't you make that happen?
No, sorry, the treaty is already the Colorado and the Tijuana River and the Rio Grande. It's all three, so that's already tied into the treaty.
But it doesn't say that you can hold delivery one to
Doesn't
the
say
other.
you
That's
can't.
what-
So that's
Doesn't
what
say
you
you
have.
can't.
So let me finish.
And that's where
The other thing is, how many states do we have in Colorado?
Well, you have the entire,
How many states? Tell me.
who are accessing
Seven.
Colorado.
7 states, Wyoming, Utah, Nevada, Colorado, Arizona, California, and New Mexico. How many states do we have in Rio Grande?
3.
So.
Well, they would,
That's why,
they would all like to have more water though.
Right.
And they're asking the question in times like this, when they have to take a 15% reduction, they say, well, why should we take a 15% reduction when Mexico's not supplying their portion on the Rio Grande? That's what's gonna bring the coalition
Maybe,
together.
you're right.
Texas with the other 7 states and
right.
saying, okay, we think that's right too. You want to keep your water.
So it would.
Deliver only 300,000
Right.
acre feet to Mexico because now you put 500,000 acres under irrigation in Arizona that wasn't under there before. Go ahead.
You have Arizona land, right? So I understand that, right? But my whole point is that I don't have that authority to do that. I don't.
Well, that's, I was gonna bring that up because the question that we brought up lately is the crux of the issue is how the State Department interprets Mexico's ability to defer the repayment of water until the end of the cycle. That's been the new interpretation. That's what allows Mexico to accumulate this debt. And so we've demonstrated mathematically to you that could have never been in anybody's brain in 1944 because Mexico doesn't have the storage capacity internally. And I ran the numbers with 0 deliveries. I've also run the numbers with 125,000 acre feet delivery by them. They still don't make it. I've run it with 210,000 acre feet, which is 20%. They still don't make it. They don't have enough interior storage. So who do we go to explain to them that you're interpreting the treaty wrong? It's not just the State Department. Is it the General Accountability Office? Is it the Office of Foreign Affairs? There's there's a Treaty Enforcement Office. I forget what that's called.
The Department of State.
In the Department of State. Who do we hammer on to say your interpretation of the treaty is incorrect about allowing them to the end of the cycle to repay the water.
So we did receive from Jennifer Cervantes and of this argument with regards to the reservoir. We are looking at it. We will be responding. And Dan, are you on the line? Dan Signs?
Yes, I am.
So with regards to the users having an opportunity to make their case with regards to other areas of the Department of State, does that exist or?
Who decides the interpretation?
Oh, the IBWC.
No, but I mean the treaty, because that's coming from the Department of State.
Right,
Five-year part.
so I understood that the IBWC is the one responsible for the interpretation of the treaty.
But if they told you they have a new interpretation, then you'd have a new interpretation.
Well, they would have a lot of weight. These are, there's a lot of experts in international law and international agreements in the Legal Affairs Bureau at the State Department. I think you mentioned that this was a new interpretation about the 5-year average. It's not. It's always been the U.S. government's interpretation, and we have State Department reports to Congress dating back a decade. We have Congressional Research Service reports dating back a couple of decades. It's always interpreted the treaty at face value, that there's a 5-year average. And there's never been anything associated. So we're happy to review this interesting new angle that there wasn't adequate storage capacity even from the get-go to abide by that 5-year requirement. But I know some of you all have come to Washington, have met with the State Department. You're certainly free to seek meetings with the State Department, but I think that's going to be an uphill battle to change a legal interpretation that's existed for decades.
And Tudor, you hit it right on the horn. It didn't matter until 1997, and it's the way it's been done. And so again, I'm trying to work within what I can.
Right, I understand that. We're trying to help you though.
Right.
We've got to figure out how to push that idea, even though, we've been beating our head against the wall for 30 years. So if we go to a new door to beat our head on, it's not going to hurt us.
So I have a question. When you say 1992, what changed? My understanding is, there were 2 reservoirs when the 1944 treaty was put in place, 8 more reservoirs created. Is that what changed in 1992?
Like from the 70s.
But what changed in 92? Why now the Henry?
That was
That's right.
The water. There was not enough water.
Yeah, exactly. Because, but you have built all these other reservoirs that didn't release it, correct?
I'm not sure.
In conjunction together with not having enough water.
Well, the 1944, the treaty, the reservoirs that were in place in 1944 were the 3 reservoirs, and they really account for like 70% of Mexico's storage. The new ones are all pretty small except for one, and they only account for 30%. That was a little bit of a shocker for me. But the main thing is that
He had one of those,
Right.
right? And Boquilla was built in 1948, so
it's
it's like a
big.
few years after the treaty. I'm sure they had that in mind. It wasn't like it was just, the treaty was signed and, oh, let's build a new reservoir. It was in the works before that, because they had they have modeling that shows it was.
Right, well, it's the big thing is that they didn't have the storage in 1944 to be able to wait till the end. So that could not have been in anybody that was there negotiating the treaty in 1940 or whenever they started.
So,
Because actually, La Boquilla was built in 1960. It's been there a long time.
oh, that's the one that, there was another one.
All of those were built before, Carranza was 1930 and San Miguel was 36. So they had all of those there for a while. And they account for 78.73% of Mexico's current storage. So it's a bunch.
So Tudor, I promised you I was gonna look at that letter and look at how lines we're trying to get this done. We're trying to get this wrapped up, but that is gonna be, I'm committed to respond to your letter in January, by the end of the month. I promise you, I have enough, because I think that if you want to take an argument like that, they're gonna send it to us. And I'd rather you see what our opinion is before you go and you take that argument, because you take it to Department of State, they're gonna say, here, Mike, I'm gonna give you an answer. And so give me that opportunity.
I will.
Okay, give me that
I've got
opportunity.
some information for you that says that even if they deliver 210,000 acre feet every year, they still can't do it.
Okay, okay, well, if you can use that information, I will definitely take a look at that. Really, what I wanted, again, my commitment is to really engage with stakeholders, understand your frustrations, Tudor, again, I'm gonna go back and look at that. Dante, even though you're not related to the Gariasis and Nogales, I forgive you. But one of the things that I've talked about is your coalition building. Put a fact sheet together for me that I can use. A one pager. Again, when Imperial Beach, which is a population of less than 50,000 or something, when they go and say the beaches have been closed for 600 days and they get 18 mayors to send a letter to the President of the United States. That's impactful. A joint letter. Okay, I'm not telling you to do that. What I'm telling you is that type of information is useful for me, so I can continue educating the people I'm meeting with. Right? Because I'm on your side.
Right.
Right? I'm on your side, I promise you.
No, I'm sorry, I should probably be clear. Commissioner Hineb has been fantastic. He has been a very vocal advocate for us, but this issue is huge. Like I said, we've got, for fruits and vegetables, it's impacting us. It's, citrus guys forecast, they're gonna be off 15 to 20%. 2,000 fewer acres of onions going in, 1,000 fewer acres of cabbage. Seed sales are down 35 to 40%. Watermelon orders are already down 20%. Yeah.
Something to that's really even.
We have that one written down.
Right, I know, but like I said, every letter I have seen, doesn't have that in there.
The other thing to consider, and I apologize, is I've seen places in California where they've moved towards mechanization, and so you have less workers, hand labor. Those towns have dried up and blown away because the employees have left. And if we aren't farming and producing and paying hand labor, what does that look like to the towns here?
Right.
The town will dry up and die.
You see, we had a mind meld there. We had a total mind meld. 42% of the Texas border counties live in poverty. The state average is 17. That is the type of information that you need to put in there, is the disadvantaged communities and how this is impacting. Again, if I don't have that, I've been going around saying that if the Texas border counties were a 51st state, they rank 51st in per capita income, second in population under the age of 18, and third in communities of color. And this was done by a study that was done by UTEP. I'd be more than willing to share that. I use that all the time. Okay. But my whole point is that those are you take the food, the impact to the economy, the impact to the people. And that's the story that would be really useful for me. Okay. So, but know that I'm advocating for you. Know that there's a lot of, I've told all of you guys, nobody is harder on me than me, because I grew up with permanent Catholic guilt. I'm always questioning whether I'm doing enough. And so these are the things that keep me up at night, right? So when I heard that some of you were coming, I was having hot flashes this morning. I was getting a little nervous, right? But I'm sincere. We are negotiating from a place of advocating for you.
So I sorry, I do want to make one more point. You had talked about in this new minute, consider allocating water from the San Juan and Alamo rivers.
Yes.
Obviously, we have some concern about that.
Right.
That's,
right.
There's nowhere to capture.
Right. And so, right. There's nowhere to capture it. Right. So I want to, we, as part of this, we need to come up with a process that would be actually agreeable. Is it 5,000 acre feet? Is it 2,000 acre feet? Is it for Mexico? That is a really impactful negotiating point for them. But I need to understand that, because people keep telling me, no, we don't want it. We don't want it. And I'm thinking, why don't you want more water? 85% of your districts are below it.
Yeah.
I understand that there's no reservoir there, I understand. But what would make it so that if, let's say Marty Gomez is full and they say, and that water is better quality. I want to show you a couple slides. Go further down. It's better quality. Let me just show you this. Let me show you this. Go back, go down.
No, the other way.
The other way. I hope, is this my back slides? I have been told that it's bad quality. Let me show you this. Go down one more. So this is the salinity level right here, the blue. And this is when San Juan water came in. Salinity wasn't impacted at all. It's actually better water. And it has less losses because it's right there at the Rio Grande, right on San Luis. It doesn't go from Ponchos, it comes in Presidio, and it doesn't have the same level of losses. Let's go one more down. I have one more. Here's another one. Salinity levels, San Juan water coming in, the two. I'd be more than happy to share this. So I need to understand more of that. And I commit to taking that to the next step. Okay?
Those, yeah, at least in the way I understand it, those water sources look great and they obviously have some good impact to the quality, right? And there's other ways that ag users in cities can address poor quality water. We do it all the time here, right? I mean, our salinity levels are off the charts, right? We all gotta have water softeners, otherwise we're replacing fixtures every 5 years. But really, I think this idea of adding the San Juan River and Alamo River probably needs to be an idea that's moved back and focused instead on those infrastructure. Because I think once we address some of these infrastructure projects that we have pending for Region N, and we've got storage here, then it makes sense.
And you guys have a list of infrastructure already identified?
I believe Region M has a very long list.
Then those are the things we need to learn about in the projects work group, so we can see how we can advance them.
I think you're looking at a gentleman that, okay, and the short list of months.
Yeah, long list, yeah, long.
Right.
Right in over our new 5-year frame, so I need to add to this.
But I commit, again, to advance that discussion, right? So, yes, sir.
Yeah, this will be the last comment.
I'm sure.
And we have a few more items on the agenda.
Oh, yes, we have to vote for president or co-chair.
I think that Rio Grande Drive, a water flowing out in June and July of 1953. So, hundreds of words. I've been in Israel, I've been to the actual Sahara Desert, I've been in Alaska, and I'm going to see some this year in Vietnam. Folks, drip irrigation is your key. Know how hard, it's difficult and expensive. Think about it. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. All right. So we got to listen to the co-chair. He's the boss here.
Okay, so we're gonna open up the floor for public comment. I know Mr. Joel Ruiz, I think he submitted. Oh, that was you? Okay, sir. Do you have a comment to make, or was that was that your comment?
They're asking for your business. Well, I have to do with the fact that I got a landlocked area in San Ignacio due to the parking ban.
Okay, and.
But that has to do with him.
Yes. And you can talk to Mr. Claudio after the meeting and he'll be more than happy to help you out with that. Okay. Is there any other comment?
Yeah, I have some erosion and I need silt to fix it.
Okay.
And it's Caddick trying to get permission to get these built.
Okay.
That was my order for sure.
Can you help him out with that, John?
I'm sorry, silt?
Silt. If there's any silt.
Removal of silt?
No, he needs to repair an area, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
So.
All right, at your property? Yes, sir, yeah.
Any other public comment at this time? For the public? Before we continue? If there's not any public comment that, at this time, the board, if there is anyone that nominations for a co-chair at this time for board co-chair.
I'd like to nominate.
Me too.
Second. Okay, anybody else? Yeah, how many days? Yes, everybody, yeah? Okay, Anthony, you're the co-chair.
I do second.
Thank you.
Thank you for asking.
And this is for the board and any other person here in the meeting. If there's any other future agenda items that you would like for that these to be discussed in future meetings, we're planning to have a meeting in late March. And probably Mr. Frank Fisher, Mr. or Ms. Leslie Howell will be contacting you on an exact date for the board. But if there's any future agenda items that you would like to discuss in future meetings, if you can bring them up at this time, and we'll consider those for the next meeting.
I just want to suggest, I mean, these guys are here, they're so full of knowledge. But it feels like we're getting information.
Not everybody thinks that.
If you actually create a coalition, you gotta build a coalition. It's kind of like you gotta get your brain on paper. So you can all speak. And so maybe you can keep doing this like monthly or like maybe we need to keep this on the agenda, like initiatives or support for the treaty or the minutes or whatever, to be a consistent agenda item. So that way we know we're still working on what Commissioner Hinet needs and we're getting the data from the people who know. Exactly. And we doesn't go like 2 years before we actually have a document.
Might want to be the coalition working on it.
We put it together. What's that? What did you say?
Your coalition working together.
Yes, I really suggested,
So it would be like an update from the local users, the community.
Yes.
Actions taken.
Or like she says, like a coalition that, like she said, like.
Put together all
Well,
the.
the Rio Grande Valley Development Council would be the one to do that, because what we need is resolutions from, if it's impactful to have a letter from the mayor of every area. The cities down here, the turnover is so great and the water department is separated from the other. They don't get it until you tell them you gotta stop washing cars, and then they get it. But it's, if we could get development council to help us do that and get the resolution out and get it,
Passed.
well,
I'm the secretary of the board, so we'll
so we can get it to Congress, and we passed all kinds of resolutions in the House recently. And then they go to the State Department and the State Department goes, well, we can't do that,
Yeah.
and that. Here you go, here's your resolution, y'all need to work on this.
Right, and so, I mean. this
It's
is
the executive branch that does this, that deals with treaties.
right, and so those are the things that you could present here and, kind of give it that litmus test. And then that day, stuff like that where you're talking about, not just like one up, this here, but pull it all together in a map. Like my fact sheet has a map on the back, right? And if you guys need some help with GIS, you can have a GIS department that can help with some of that as well,
Okay, one thing, like you mentioned the infrastructure, at the Region M, which we're supposed to do the water plans for next water development board, at least the money, we don't do anything with that. Ags don't have any.
Right. That's right,
And,
right.
And I never, we have like two members ag and rest are.
Well, that came up at the meeting a couple of weeks ago. In that, when you're doing a project with an irrigation district, if it's a long-term loan at a low interest rate, they can't pay it back because they don't have the economics to do that.
Right.
If it's a grant or a grant and a loan, then maybe they can do that, but the economics of water down here just don't make that possible.
Right. But what do you think?
They can't line all their canals with concrete and pass a bond and then.
Right, but what do you think that $4 billion under the Inflation Reduction Act to the Colorado River?
Right, well, we didn't get any of that.
I know, but we did.
Well, I mean, we feel forgotten enough down here as it is.
Right, but that was the 7 states, right? And I think you're on it. That, I talked to the 7 states about the issues that were going on here, and they asked me, how could they help? And I don't know how to answer that. Honestly, I do not know how to answer that. Because they're not gonna hold they're not gonna hold the Colorado River water, I'll tell you that much.
Well, they would maybe like to have more of it. They would probably not like to have to take a 15% reduction. Let's say, why don't we take a 0% reduction and we give Mexico a 35%
Well,
reduction?
Mexico is looking at getting a proportional reduction.
I know they are, but I'm just saying, we're getting a more than proportional reduction here.
Right, and they have not expressed that interest in the meetings that we have.
I'm from Arizona, I live in Arizona. So the Colorado River population from the US side was grossly miscalculated. So now if they're having to scramble and figure out to even.
Yeah, no, but holistically or compared, yeah.
Yeah, so like, yeah, what you're saying is they're not gonna, you know, with the Colorado.
But I think when it comes to resources, this is your opportunity to start
Well,
partnering.
we've always thought that when we tell the Colorado, you're gonna withhold water on the Colorado from Mexico, we hear, well, we can't do that because we've got to move it from dam to dam and it generates electric power and everything else. But if we tell the people on the end of the line, I don't know why you don't use more of it because they're keeping ours in Mexico. That might be different.
Any other agenda items?
The salinity study,
Yeah,
the binational salinity study.
okay.
And then, including the Elmer Drainage data system that we still have to pay for.
Oh, yeah. And let me tell you, I just saw some pictures not too long ago of Rio Grande and the pump station looks fabulous. I think they really need to show you the investment that has gone into that. And I know there's still issues that are going on because of constraint, but I think that'd be really important for them to see as well. Yeah. Oh, yes, I know, yes.
I'm the city guy that went with 5 irrigators to the drain in Mexico and all of this, and then to tell about it.
Any other future agenda items before we adjourn?
I'd like to know structural integrity of the levee.
Yeah.
That
Oh, yeah.
seems to be an ongoing issue.
It is.
With us and for how we're gonna get our mats updated. Because it's Mexico side, if they don't do something, it's all for naught, right? If ours is great, then theirs is.
Well,
It's all.
protected on our side.
Yeah, but if all that water.
One time there was talk about, I've been downhill, water from Arkansas to South Texas, what happened?
That's our water. Responsibility.
Thank you, Dad.
No, I'm sorry. I was gonna add one more. So, we talked about looking at conditions on the Mexico side. One of the things that the farmers in Tamaulipas and the farmers in Texas talked about the last time there was a major storm event was the inflows in Tamaulipas are not maintained or upkept. And so they're not regularly shredding or moving all of those, all the grasses and all that out of there. And so we're not capturing any of that water when they even have smaller rain events. You talked about impacting or changing the quality of water and the salinity. That's helpful. And I mean, that's fairly easy. You put guys on tractors, but if you can't pay that guy, fuel the tractor, take it out there, where it doesn't even have that job assignment, it doesn't get done. So it'd be nice to get an update on that, and make sure that Tamaulipas is keeping up with that portion of it.
And that creativity in our projects work group is really useful because it'll get funding to it. Yeah, it'll get funding to it.
And if, before we adjourn, if there's any other, updates or agenda items you would like to discuss, you can also forward them to Mr. Frank Station. And he'll make note of them and we can put them for the next upcoming meeting. So at this time, we want to thank all of you for being here today, and this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Yeah,